Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. Today, we are continuing on the Halloween horror movie reviews, season 1, episode 27. And today's horror movie I'm going to review is the 1981 horror movie An American Werewolf in London. Now, many people consider this a horror comedy, which I kind of consider this more of a horror movie, to be honest, with some comedic bits, but that's just me. Maybe I'm just weird in that corner, but at the end of the day, this is but I do really like this movie. And we're gonna get into the review. But before we do, we'll get into the plot and the cast and all that. So, what is the plot to the 1981 movie An American Werewolf in London? Well, the plot of the movie is as follows. While backpacking through England, two American college students, David and Jack, are mauled by a creature that kills one and puts the other in a shape-shifting pinch. So that's basically the simple plot synopsis to the movie. Now, anyways, how was this movie received? Well, when the movie was released on August 21st, 1981 in the US, it received positive reviews from critics and audiences. The movie was a huge success, making $62 million worldwide on a $5.8 million budget, and it launched director John Landis's career, as after this movie, he would go on to direct the popular 1988 comedy movie Coming to America starring Eddie Murphy, which I love that movie. Now, as for my reaction to the movie, yeah. An American Werewolf in London. Now, I know for most people, this is considered the best werewolf movie of all time. While it's not quite there for me, it's still a really good movie. And I really like this movie. So, without further ado, let's get into my review. The movie starts off where we are introduced to David and Jack, who are best friends and are backpacking through England. And I thought that they were good characters. You definitely bought their chemistry as friends. Early on in the movie, when it is nighttime, David and Jack reach a bar called The Slaughtered Lamb, which they find strange as the bar's sign has a dead stabbed wolf as the logo, which I thought was a cool name for a bar, for a fictional bar in a movie. And then Jack and David go inside the bar and they ask if they can come in, saying it's very cold outside, and the bartender approves. And one thing I think works really well about this movie is its story and its characters. But then, Jack and David notice a very odd star on the wall with 5 points, a red star, and so Jack decides to ask what the star on the wall is for, and there's a guy who's throwing a dart at a dartboard, a guy who has never missed, and he says to Jack, upset, "You made me miss. I never miss." And then he apologizes for it, and then David says, "I think we better leave." But before they can leave, the bartender says they can't go. They must not go. But then a guy basically tells them to go, but to stay on the path and beware the full moon. When they leave the bar and are walking at night, it starts raining. The bartender then says, perhaps they'll be safe in the rain. And then there's the whole scene where a werewolf howls into the moon and everyone in the bar hears it. The bartender says, we must go rescue them. And David and Jack are confused, and Jack says maybe it was a coyote, but David says there's no coyotes in England. And David and Jack agreed to go back to the Slaughtered Lamb bar, but they get lost on the trail. Jack is mauled to death by a werewolf and dies, and David is bitten by a werewolf, but he survives as the people from the bar shoot the werewolf to death. And then we now cut to 3 weeks later, where David is in the hospital and he's woken up by Dr. Hirsch and Mr. Collins. Dr. Hirsch tells David that he's in a hospital in London and that Jack died. David also learns that he was unconscious for 3 weeks, and Dr. Hirsch says a lunatic attacked Jack. David tells Mr. Hirsch it was a wolf, but obviously Dr. Hirsch is in disbelief. David then says, "Something attacked us. I know it was not a person." And not long after that, a nurse by the name of Alex, she comes to David's room and tells David that he has to eat something, but David says he's not hungry. I really like the nightmare sequence 31 minutes into the movie where this is a nightmare scene where David, in his dream, is at his family's house, and his family is attacked by werewolf military soldiers with machine guns, which I thought that scene was actually pretty funny. At the 33-minute mark of the movie, David now this is where things take a big turn. At the 33-minute mark of the movie, we find out this is a dream eventually, but David sees his dead friend Jack in the hospital room, and Jack basically tells David that he was attacked by a werewolf and that he is starting to become one. And Jack says, "I now walk the earth in limbo until the werewolf's curse is lifted. Until the werewolf's curse is lifted. The last remaining werewolf must be destroyed. It's you, David. Please believe me. You'll destroy people. Please destroy yourself before you hurt others. Beware the full moon, David." And then David wakes up and he tells the nurse Alex what his dead friend Jack told him in the dream, and but then the nurse talks to David and reassures David that it's just a dream and nothing to worry about, and David agrees. And throughout the rest of the movie, David is dating Alex, the female nurse, and one thing I do think works well about this movie, you definitely buy their chemistry as friends, and I thought that the actors played the characters rather well. Later that night, David has another vivid dream where his dead friend Jack tells David that tomorrow night is the full moon and he will become a werewolf, and then David decides to tell Alex that Jack visited him and told him tomorrow night he'll become a werewolf. And I like the part when the nurse Alex laughs and says, "A part of me feels bad for you, yet I find you terribly attractive." Like, I thought the way that Alex, the female nurse, delivered that line was pretty funny. Later that night, Later the next day, the nurse Alex walks David out of her apartment and says, "If you get anxious, call me. I left those pills for you." She then kisses David and goes off to the hospital. And now this is a build-up movie, but it's worth it. We then cut to the 59-minute mark of the movie where David is screaming in pain and agony as the full moon is out, and his body is in severe pain as he is starting to transform into a werewolf. And I will say, 44 years later, the practical effects by Rick Baker in this scene alone still hold up very well. And while this is not quite my favorite werewolf movie, I will say this movie does have the best practical effects and the best werewolf transformation in any movie. Later that night, David, who is now fully transformed into a werewolf, violently attacks a couple, and the female nurse Alex is asked by her boss to call the phone number of her apartment, as that's where David is supposed to be at. And David does not answer, so then Alex's boss decides to call the police. And by Alex's boss, I am referring to Dr. Hirsch. Later that night, the werewolf is rampaging in London City like Jack said it would. And so the next morning, David, now back in the form of a person, wakes up naked at a zoo, confused, and he steals a kid's balloons to cover himself up with, and then he steals a really long coat that covers up his body, and then, basically, runs back to Alex's apartment. Alex then calls the manager, who tells her to bring the manager, Dr. Kirsch, tells Alex to bring David into his custody at the hospital, to basically bring David to the hospital right away. And David runs out of the car and tells the taxi to stop, and David says that tries to get himself arrested by the cops, but it doesn't work. And then David says to his to the person he's dating, Alex, he says, please stay away from me. I'm a danger to myself and everyone. Like, I cannot risk you getting hurt. And David says, stay away from me. I love you, Alex. And then he gives her a kiss and runs off. Then there's the whole scene in the movie. Then, of course, there's the whole scene where David is in the movie theater talking to his dead friend Jack, as David is the only one who can see him. And then the 6 people who were attacked by David the previous night, their ghosts are talking to David, and they tell David that he must destroy himself to free the spirits of the victims and destroy the werewolf curse. Then, of course, there is the whole iconic scene where one of the most well-known scenes of the movie, where David turns into a werewolf and attacks a movie theater employee, and then a British police officer finds the dead body, and then the werewolf feasting on it, and then the police officer freaks out, and a whole group of British police officers close the door, slam it shut, and then the werewolf busts down the door, and this werewolf is attacking police officers, and you know, there's even a part where the werewolf causes a bus to crash and multiple cars to crash as well. And near the end of the movie, Alex is notified that there's a disturbance in the city, so she begins to suspect that it's David, and so she's able to get past some police officers, and she comes across the werewolf, and she basically asks David, is that you? And then she says to David, realizing it's her, Alex says to her, let me help you. I love you, David. And then the werewolf is about to attack Alex, but the police stop David by shooting the werewolf. And then Alex cries when she sees David dead. So yeah, at the end of the day, this is a really good movie, but okay. Do I have any bad qualities of the movie? I do think the ending is a little too abrupt. Now look, I get it. I understand why the movie ended the way it did, because the police officers had to destroy the werewolf, but I do think the ending could have been better. It could have had a better, more emotional scene where basically, like, for example, let's say the cops were to shoot David, but David is talking to Alex right before he dies in her arms, and you know, like, you could have had an ending where Alex says, I love you, David, and once David is transformed back into a human, but before he dies, he says, I love you, and he's crying, and kisses Alex and hugs her in her arms, and then passes away. Like, I think you could have had the ending like that to make it a little more emotional. But other than that, An American Werewolf in London is a great movie that still holds up 44 years later. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give An American Werewolf in London a 9 out of 10. So yeah, there we go, guys. That was my review. And next up, I will be covering the first movie in the Evil Dead franchise, The Evil Dead from 1981, directed by Sam Raimi. But until then, guys, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye now.